This is Generation Health. Every week we bring you news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices for living a long, healthy life. With the tools and information available today, this generation has the potential to be the healthiest in human history. Following in the footsteps of our founder, Joe DiMatteo, we are the second generation of a family dedicated to helping you live better and longer. Dante DiMatteo, to my right, registered pharmacist, certified strength and conditioning specialist. How are you doing, sir?
Good. Thank you.
Wow.
Happy to be here.
I'm glad. It would be better to be here than anywhere else, right?
That's right.
It's the only place. And across from me, Mr. Joey DiMatteo, registered pharmacist and board-certified clinical nutritionist. How are you?
Very good. How are you today, sir?
I'm awake.
You're awake.
I'm ready to go.
To start.
I am your host, Tyler Andrews, and we've got a lot to talk about. On today's show, we're going to talk about ulcerative colitis, one of my favorite topics, joint pain solutions, and how to help with that, especially, we'll get to it. And then also, we've got some information about the FDA pulling back on fast-tracking drugs, which I learned a lot about all that. But first, the most important question. Joey, did you look ahead?
I did.
Good. I'm glad you did.
Only
actually.
today.
Yeah. We've got a really important thing happening here very soon, so it seemed only appropriate that the question be, what's your best marriage advice?
Best marriage advice. I mean, it's one of those things, because I did think about it, and it's like the answer is just going to sound so cliche and so corny.
Do it.
You know what I mean? You look for this like magical answer or whatever, but the best thing, and Dane and I are still working on it, is communication, is making sure that we talk things out and we don't let these little, because it just continues to go. I'm not doing the dishes or whatever ever, and
right.
She is getting mad about that in the inside, and then she's ready to snap on me for one little thing that happens later in the day.
Yep.
And it's all really based on like, hey Joe, can you do the dishes like a couple times a week or today because I'm really
yep.
tired about that.
Yeah.
So I know that kind of obviously applies to a lot of different relationships, but that's, I think, the number one thing that we talk about and that we've have a decent job at, I would say, overall, is to make sure that we just communicate.
That's awesome. I've got two things. Number one, communication, saying the little things.
Yes.
Talking about and actively working through who is going to do the dishes, and who is going to, what is the nighttime routine? What are the expectations? Even those things that don't seem, when we first got married, I had a huge issue with the way my wife put toilet paper on the toilet paper holder. Over the top is the only acceptable way, just to be clear. And she did it whichever way seemed appropriate in the moment, I guess. There was no rhyme or reason to how my wife put toilet paper on.
She wasn't very opinionated on it.
But I had to say, look, this doesn't make sense to you, and you don't have to understand. It can be a 1 to you, but it's like a 9.5 to me in terms of importance. I need the toilet paper to be put on appropriately. But little things, they add up. And if you can do that right, if you can do the dishes, if you can get the nighttime routine correct, if you can, whatever those little things are, because you do them 7 times a week minimum, and if it's mealtime, well, you do that 3 times a day, maybe not with your spouse every time, but you do it multiple times a day. Right. You got to do the little things right. That's the one thing. The other thing, and this is much more serious, that has made a huge difference in my marriage is we had a really good marriage counselor, another couple that got married very young, and they said, at the end of the day, someday there's going to be a day when the only thing you can say is, I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be so mad. You're going to dislike the person on every level. There's nothing that they will have ever done right in their life. But if you can look at them and say, I'm not going anywhere, that's what matters. And you can keep fighting, keep working. Even if you're just holding on to get a better grip so you can swing harder.
That's the foundational thing.
Yep.
I'm not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere. I can't say I love you in this moment, but I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
And that kind of commitment has been critical for us.
I like that. And I think even back to the communication thing, I think what's interesting and why it is a constant battle is because relationships morph, not just the relationship itself, but when you have kids,
Yep.
It morphs everything.
100%.
Nighttime routine meant nothing 7 years ago.
Right.
Literally nothing.
Yeah.
You know, tiny little house, no other kids making a mess. Take out half the time, put our dishes in the dishwasher. That was it.
Yeah.
Now nighttime routine is a massive like hour plus undertaking.
Yeah.
You know, and so I got used to coming home from work and not having to do much when I came home. Then it morphed into like, well, I'll play with the kid a little bit, give Dana a break. And now it's like this house needs like maintained.
Yeah, you gotta
know
be
what I mean?
engaged.
Yeah. So
Yep.
it's like the relationship. So the point is the relationship will continue to morph as your life changes. And that's why the communication part, even when you think you have it down, because you have to learn new ways to do it and new issues and new.
Absolutely. The person you're married to initially shouldn't be the person you're married to 5 years from now.
Impossible.
Just like you shouldn't be the same person 5 years from now. Hopefully you're going to progress and change and develop. But that means constant renegotiation of that relationship into what it is now and what you want it to be. So there you go. You don't get to have an answer because you're not married yet. But by the time this comes out, the man will be. So say congratulations. Very excited for you, sir.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was really good. I appreciate all that.
And it's all
seriously.
recorded, so you can go back and listen to it multiple times as needed.
I don't know if it was that good, but
No, it was good.
Oh, man, I am. There is so much going on in the news. Every time I start pulling these shows together, it's hard to figure out what to not cover because there is just so much. So starting off, we've got articles about the FDA reducing fast tracking of drugs. Joey, what in the world is going on? What is fast tracking? What is the normal process first?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't want to turn this into, like a PowerPoint on the FDA approval process. But I think, the core thing to get out of the way is the way this is typically done takes like 8 to 10 years.
Right.
That's how long it takes to get, something from whenever the drug is essentially created, by a drug company to approval. And the patent clock is running that whole time. You're probably happy if you're at 8. You're probably most likely at 10.
Okay.
So that involves,
and that's not research beforehand developing the drug. That's once you've developed it, you go, hey, this is a really good drug for blood pressure. We're going to apply for the FDA patent and approval. Now the clock is running, and you got about 8 years theoretically minimum to get that out. Okay.
So you've got like a preclinical stage where this is where the researchers are performing, the lab testing, et cetera. Sometimes on animals, gathering as much information as they can. Then you've got the clinical development stage. So that means when you start moving over to humans.
Right.
Okay. Then you've got the 4 phases of trials.
Oh, wow.
So, and each of these is a couple years typically, and then it varies. Phase 1, small group of volunteers. Phase 2 is if it's shown to be safe, then you move into more of that demographic that needs the drug. Because at first you're really just testing for safety initially. You don't, if it's a cancer drug, you don't need these people to have cancer at phase 1. You're really testing for just like safety.
It's not going to create cancer.
Right. Yeah. And then, phase 3, it just grows. You just give it to more people.
Yeah.
And phase 4 is monitoring. So again, that clock is ticking during that time. Patents are 20 years. So also FDA is looking at your manufacturing. They're going through everything they can to approve this drug. So what fast tracking does, and we can break that out a little bit. There's really 4 different kinds, and this somehow doesn't even include emergency use authorization, which is
really
separate.
Oh my gosh.
4 different kinds. You've got fast track, you've got breakthrough therapy, you have accelerated approval, and you have priority review. So again, I don't want to go deep into these, but fast track is typically whenever there's an unmet need. So that's why fast track, is critical, because you're talking about things that essentially do not have, any current therapy. But the danger of it is you're often using not preliminary, non-clinical information to get this ball rolling. So, you know, there's risk there in terms of what you are, you know, utilizing to get this medication going. So in 2021, 18 of 50 drugs that were approved were fast-tracked. In 2020, 17 out of 53. So,
wow.
Yeah, and these are for serious conditions, which is obviously very subjective. All right. But you're looking for things that are treatments. I mean, you're looking for conditions that are based on survival, day-to-day functioning. You know, you're not going to fast track. Well, I guess you could. Yeah, depression is on there. That's a bad example.
Okay.
But you're not going to fast track, you know, some new
hangnail medication.
Yeah. I was looking for a better example, but yeah, you're going to fast track serious stuff.
Okay.
Maybe not you're not going to fast track a blood pressure medication at this stage.
Which is because there's already effective, shown to be effective and safe treatments for blood pressure.
Yes.
And
so you're going to AIDS, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, depression, diabetes, things where people are not getting needs met.
AIDS may be a good example just because it's, you know, a couple decades in the rearview mirror at this point. There are effective treatments on the market, but 1988, 1993, 1997, it was still, a significant problem with terminal consequences. So you would fast track a drug because for those people who have that and are dealing with it, I'm willing to take an experimental drug if it means I might get to live a little longer.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yes. And so here's then just a couple caveats to that. So they go so fast, so to say, that then they are expected to conduct their own follow-up studies.
Okay.
To be determined by the FDA.
Okay.
So it's individualized. They continue to monitor the basic approval standards that the FDA has, you know, safety, efficacy, all those things.
Sure.
So the drug company is expected to do that, which you can kind of guess how often that can go.
That's the point of what's happening right now, isn't it?
Yes. So the issues come in with the drug companies don't do the testing or they drag their feet. There are examples of where they've pulled it. You know, Blenrep is a GSK drug for blood cancer, myeloma, and it was fast tracked as it was used when other therapies had failed, and they pulled it off the market in 2016. It had a novel mechanism of action because that's a big thing to also whenever they fast track drugs, and that's critical because. Yes, you want new mechanisms of action out there. That's like the breakthrough drug, new mechanism of action. But that's also the scariest because it's a new mechanism of action in the body. So that's a constant.
So when they pull it, you're talking about a drug that they fast track. It got fast track approval. It's out in the world. People are taking the drug, and then they remove it from the market. Now, is that typically because they discover that it's not actually safe, or they discover it's not actually effective, or is it just the?
It's mixed. It's usually not effective, but definitely has the.
Oh wow! Yeah. It's not effective.
It's kind of an aside to that. For whatever reason, I focused on, you know, just more down the path of the accelerated approval, you know, specifically. It seemed like for whatever reason that was just easy to find, right?
It's a huge
part of it.
Yeah.
The ones there was a study that looked at all the drugs that were accelerated. So again, like Joey said, that's just one component of all the four that the FDA, you know, of all their criteria. So in the accelerated approval, there were none that were actually pulled because of a major safety issue, I believe. Right? So,
I did not see any with safety.
So that was from, I would say, the years of 1992 to 2018, which is still a good sign. There wasn't something pulled that from the accelerated track specifically that led to, you know, a direct, you know, mortality sort of thing or whatever. So they're pulling it. They're pulling stuff mainly because of the lack of efficacy.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the accelerated, I kind of have that listed as number 3, but what's interesting about the accelerated approval is they don't say it directly, but it appears that these are studied a little longer, and that could be why.
Yeah.
And because it's really interesting, they're looking at surrogate endpoints.
Yeah.
So
what does that
sometimes
mean?
this is even like where Dante and I will even disagree on certain things. Like a surrogate endpoint is where, like instead of looking at does this cancer drug make a person live longer, they're saying does the tumor shrink?
Oh. Or is there like a blood marker? Is there
Yes.
some sort of like something that would potentially project the clinical endpoint?
Okay, so there,
like you
yeah,
said?
so it's kind of a it's a smaller milestone that they're
Yes,
looking for,
exactly.
specific result.
Yes, some, and then it gets very gray because cholesterol has typically been accepted, I think at this point, as a surrogate endpoint that you can roll with, so to say.
Okay.
That if it's lowering cholesterol, you're good to go.
Yep.
But they're even finding that shrinking of tumor is technically and clinically not necessarily a endpoint. It's a surrogate endpoint, but it's
Wow.
not an endpoint with meaning.
Presumably because it can still metastasize, or
Yeah,
it can.
you can.
Yeah,
is
you're
it
still
extending?
sick.
Does this show that there's life extension with this treatment, which ultimately you want? You know, and there's other things, quality of life. There's a million other ultimate endpoints,
Right.
But does a tumor shrink in this constrained time period doesn't necessarily equal this person lived for a median 5-year survival longer,
Wow.
or whatever.
Right.
So I mean that's a huge theme across healthcare altogether and research altogether. You look at even things that are mechanistic studies, and I think that's kind of partially what Joey was saying as well, is you see something in a mechanistic study, a petri dish study, so to speak, that
Right.
looks really good and it makes tons of logical sense, but you can't necessarily extrapolate that to living longer. My waist shrunk. I'm
Right.
stronger.
Right.
Whatever. There's
Yeah.
more, kind of glaring.
And sometimes
endpoints.
that's like, not to like change gears, but sometimes that's what becomes difficult with supplements.
Yeah.
And what I've talked about, he and I, is that it's hard to get as quality of life study and a length of life study on CoQ10.
Right.
So how comfortable are you rolling with the surrogate endpoint, so to say, on some of the things in a supplement or things like that, because we don't have these types of of cash and testing at our whim. So
and that's some of what's being discovered, and what the FDA is pulling back on is that the surrogate endpoints aren't proving to be truly demonstrative of longer life or better outcomes or what have you.
potentially.
And so that's why they're going, we've done the additional study, or we haven't.
Yeah.
We've done the additional study. It's not working like it should be, so we're pulling it off the market.
Yeah.
So what are they changing? I mean, is that what's happening? Are they just going to be stricter about these studies? Is
Yeah,
that the
it
idea?
depends too. When I read the article, they are sticking to the term fast track, but I just thought it was very important to go in to the few different types. If we're already going to talk about this, to go into the few different types, because there are nuances to them.
Right, 'cause
Fast track is again the typically a new mechanism of action, and is typically something that does not have other treatments available for it.
Right.
So they could be using fast track as a broad term, because that's, term,
Yeah.
but it technically was under the breakthrough. So for example, breakthrough therapy is second on my list of 4.
Yeah.
And that one is that based on clinical data, you're showing significant endpoint improvement over current therapies.
Got
this one, there's other drugs out there, but this one is better, and we've got to get this out there.
Yeah.
Breakthrough therapy is a big one. I mean, the term they're giving, it's big. It's had a few examples. Lartruvo was withdrawn from the market in 2016. The aftermarket double-blind study, no life expectancy benefit. Cancer drug,
Wow.
none. Carbomedics, still on the market, still has shown only surrogate endpoints and not able to demonstrate quality of life benefit or life expectancy improvements. I don't know how much it's used, but it's still on the market at a cost of $170,000 per year.
Oh my gosh.
Some of them, cancer drugs,
Yeah.
because that's what a lot of these are,
Right.
have been shown to actually lower quality of life
Yeah.
on different markers. Then in this accelerated approval, quickly, a big one just to hit on is the Aduhelm for Alzheimer's. That was supposed to be that big cure for Alzheimer's. It was because in PET scans, they saw some benefit, surrogate endpoint.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then it's $56,000 a year. They couldn't find clinical benefit. And that doesn't include the $2,500 to $7,500 PET scan you have to get before, and then yearly, once or twice yearly after that. And again, only helped the endpoints. a surrogate endpoint, did not help actual endpoints of cognitively how are these people feeling.
Right. Alzheimer's is a good example because if you come up with the drug that's going to end that, I want you, as somebody, I literally just was at a funeral for my uncle who died of Alzheimer's. I want that drug on the market today.
Right.
I want that. And so I want there to be some sort of fast track approval, because if he had just been diagnosed today and the drug is discovered today, and you're telling me, well, best case scenario, 8 years from now, realistically, is when he might be able to get it. Like, that's not going to help me or him.
That's why so many of these things are nuanced, and it's really tough. You can sit here and slam the FDA and slam all this and slam all that. But that's why I think that it is important to go into some of these details of what they do, why they do it, and, because it's not that simple.
Yeah. Gosh. That's a really interesting point that was even highlighted in the earlier study that I mentioned, which I do want to add. Yeah. Even though there were no safety-related withdrawals, there were still multiple boxed warnings that were added. So meaning after the drug was eventually made it through, let's say, accelerated approval, got regular approval, then they determined, hey, there was significant damage to the kidney potentially, or elevated liver enzymes, whatever. They slapped a boxed warning on there. So it wasn't all perfect.
Right.
So the other layer to that is, in a more like humanistic perspective, they talked about, okay, so people hear about these medications that are being developed. They're in the pipeline. Yeah. Is this a potential Alzheimer's treatment option? I don't want my loved one to not have the opportunity to get this. It's also like, what about the idea of, false hope that's going out there? It's false hope, and these drugs are $50,000 a year. It's $100,000 a year. Like Joey said, this is so incredibly nuanced. Like, what do you actually do?
But quickly, with the Aduhelm, I just wanted to tie in one other thing. Yeah. So what they were doing, because Dante was bringing up, what's the end game with some of this? What they're doing with that is it's CMS right now. Is only going to allow it to be in trials. So they're basically...
CMS is the drug manufacturer?
CMS is Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So Medicaid and Medicare is primarily a Medicare issue, but they blend. Sure. Is going to, because the drug has been approved, they're not going to pay for it at your local pharmacy, but they are going to pay for it in certain randomized controlled trials so that they can continue to... Because at some point, payers do end up calling some level of the shots about what they're going to end up paying for, based on its effectiveness. So that is kind of ongoing. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope, because even when they were approving this, there's different committees which handle different types of. So it's not just FDA looks at every kind of drug. They have subcommittees that look at certain types. Right. Okay. So this one's the FDA's Peripheral and Central Nervous System Advisory Committee. 3 members resigned in protest.
Oh, wow.
During the approval process, and it was rejected in Europe. So when you look at, I know this is a big one to keep harping on, but it was in the news big time. And I think when you add its effect, when you add in its need, you add in how debilitating it is for people, you add in the cost, it's just, and then you add in all the controversy. It's like the poster child for the problem with this, unfortunately. Yeah. So then they do something else, kind of, I don't want to keep harping on it, but priority review is number 4. Okay. And priority review is just like it sounds. Basically, you've essentially done all the stuff that everybody else has done, but in a normal drug process approval has done. Sure. But you get kind of designated that you will have your application reviewed in 6 months versus 10 months. So this is just a good old, just moving to the front of the line. Right. Mm-hmm. So this one, they really don't see any problem with. I'm glad something like this exists. Yeah. And the other thing they do is, which I thought was interesting, and this is just like a dovetail, but priority review vouchers. So in that priority review program, if you are making a drug that's related to certain tropical diseases, certain childhood diseases, basically extremely rare diseases that nobody wants to make a drug for because nobody can make money off of them. If you make a drug like that and it gets approved and it's effective, you may not have a blockbuster drug in the pipeline that needs a priority review voucher, but they give you the priority review voucher and you can sell it.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really cool. So, so it's an incentive for companies to make these, they call them like orphan drugs, to make these drugs that they know they're not going to be big They said that a priority review voucher can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
That's amazing.
To get something to...
It can facilitate the production of some other drugs or something else. That's really cool.
And that just comes down to cash. If you've got, because a blockbuster drug typically is going to be, a med for AFib nowadays, med for breathing, it's going to be something like that, diabetes.
Yep.
So if you get one of those, on the market that much sooner, that's where the money comes in and you could sell it. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then the last thing is in its own category, and I think it must be said because of COVID times, is emergency use authorization.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much information you found on it, but it just kind of seems like they can kind of flick a switch on that whenever they want it. Hydroxychloroquine, I mean, they had data on that. They turned it on, and it was got the EUA, and then they turned it off. Now things that are a little more serious, like the shots, they follow you for 2 months versus the standard 6 months. They don't really go into your facility as much as they nearly would during other parts of the process. I mean, it definitely becomes a lot of subjective.
Okay, so you're saying the emergency use authorization is literally emergency, like if there's, I don't know, a global pandemic.
Yeah, it started around anthrax. Let me cut you off, but I think it's important. I missed.
Yeah.
It started around the anthrax scares in 2004. That's why this is this is the newest to get. 2004, anthrax, bird flu, swine flu. They just had to have something that was a bazooka that they could put out there and say this can be a vaccine or drug. Sorry, but go ahead.
No,
that was critical.
Yeah, so they don't do hardly any long-term. There is no long-term study. There is none of that stuff. It's just, this is a really, really big problem right now, so we're willing to roll the dice on this and hope for the best.
Yeah, we'll watch it for 2 months, and we'll cross our fingers that we can gather enough data in those 2 months.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It is wild. I mean, and it's no wonder why people get uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable conversation. But I just think that, in news articles and these discussions, as long as we try to highlight certain things that a study did well, or certain things that a study didn't do well, or certain things that the FDA has in place that should help kind of reassure people. You know what I mean? It's not, it's uncomfortable to hear. The COVID vaccine, for example, it's just it's the age old question at this point. There's no long-term studies, no crap, we get that, but as long as people start to understand why these things are in place, the different levels that are there, the demands of like the post-approval trials that are in place, not that they're always done perfectly, they're there, and you just hope that eventually there's more of like a collaborative effort between the drug manufacturers and the FDA that help to kind of get things going. Because when you're the drug manufacturer, you came up with this great drug, you've spent all this money, and then let's say you make it to the accelerated approval process, and then you get just slapped with this. You got to have this, and this in your clinical trial, or else we're pulling it in a year. You're like, well, the heck with you. Like, no wonder there's so much strife between the two. It's that you hope that there's in a perfect world, in a vacuum, that they can work together better, because that's the only way that this stuff ever makes it to market and stays in market. I don't know.
Yeah, and work together
in a dream, maybe,
and work together in a way that doesn't involve kickbacks and finances of things.
Yeah, it's twisted.
Yeah.
So, any practical takeaways? Anything that listeners should be aware of, like when they're being prescribed a drug, they need to be careful that it's not a fast-track drug, or that it's okay if it's fast.
At least all this stuff is on the FDA's website. So the accelerated track, for example, if you just Google accelerated approved drugs, there's a list of like 260 or 300 on there that if you were curious, they're on there. And they're not all drugs. It's 268 or 278 indications for medications. So it's out there.
Yeah. So you can search for, if you get prescribed something and you're not familiar with it, you can search for it and know, and then you just ask questions.
Yeah, and like Joey said, most of these are oncology medications, or a high percentage of them are.
Yep.
There are some others, anti-infectives and such, but HIV drugs, AIDS medications, oncology treatments and
Yeah,
such.
yeah. Most of the time, vast majority of the time, thank God, you're going to know you're in a position to need a fast track drug. God forbid.
Right.
But it's still worth asking questions if you're being put on something that's rarely used, that your doctor describes as novel. Because there are other examples, and again, I don't want to keep going down. We could do this for a while, but there is a big article that I have here regarding medication that was used for Parkinson's psychosis that was pulled off. This very expensive. It was no good real endpoints, just some surrogate endpoints. It was making some people worse, those kinds of things.
Wow.
Then there are other ones, Ulcerative, that was used for gout. There are other good drugs are out there for gout. This one managed to kick and scream and stay out there on the market despite the fact it was causing cardiovascular disease for a much higher percentage of people that were taking that versus allopurinol, a different one that's more commonly used for gout. So there's still stuff out there, believe me. And again, so I don't want to sugarcoat issues like this either. But yeah, in general, the takeaway is if you're going to be on the average drug that you're going to walk in and get is not going to be fast tracked. And if it was fast tracked a while ago, and it's become common therapy. And if it is, it's God forbid cancer. It's very serious.
Right.
If you start getting into some of the more the wackier stuff, the doctors will kind of mention, or really expensive stuff, then sure, maybe you want to ask in that case.
All right, so we got a question emailed in from Lily. She emailed us at questions@askjoedimatteo.com. You can do the same. Lily said, could you please discuss ulcerative colitis in young kids? Mine is 12. I'm very excited about the new podcast, and I'm waiting with bated breath. Well, don't wait. Breathe, please. We don't want you to pass out. Ulcerative colitis in young kids. Ulcerative colitis isn't that an old person's disease?
Yeah, so the peak age onset of ulcerative colitis is anywhere from 30 to 40 years old.
Okay.
But it ultimately can occur at any age. Okay. So 15 to 30 is common. There's still a large percentage of adults that get it after 60 years old. It can happen throughout the lifespan.
Yeah, 25% do contract it during childhood. 25%.
Wow. Okay, so for folks that don't know, what is ulcerative colitis?
Yeah, so it's under the umbrella of the inflammatory bowel disease.
Okay.
And so there's multiple diseases within that. Crohn's and ulcerative colitis are sort of the big two, or at least the two that are very most tightly related.
Okay.
The classic difference with colitis is that it's dealing with inflammation and mucosal damage to the colon and rectum, so your large intestine.
Got it.
The difference with Crohn's is that it can ultimately affect any part of your GI tract. And so, in a very rudimentary way, ulcerative colitis just encompasses the changes that happen to the large intestine specifically.
Okay.
So lower in the GI tract, sometimes individuals, they only have issues with proctitis or like inflammation of the rectum and such. So you just kind of think of it as lower in the GI tract.
Okay.
And the inflammation doesn't span through like all layers of the intestine. It stays again more towards that internal mucosa.
So close to where your food is processing. Yep. Okay. And so what is it? So it's an inflammation of the mucosal there. What does that feel like? What does that mean functionally?
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about IBS and such and other GI issues. So a lot of the symptoms that you'll see will mimic a lot of those other GI conditions.
Okay.
Some of the distinguishing features are just extended periods or frequent bouts of diarrhea, the classic abdominal pain and cramping. There's some systemic symptoms. You'll see fever, weight loss.
Wow.
Bloody stools is, often a giveaway as well. And then as far as classification goes, they'll just break down some of those symptoms more and say, this person has had 10 or more, bloody stools per week or per month. And then that's how you begin to, the clinician will begin to parse out what kind of tests do we need to run? Do we need to look at stool samples? What's present in the stool? All those sorts of things.
Okay. So if this is happening to somebody that's 12 years old, that's rough.
It is. Yeah.
Man, oh man.
And that's a huge part of this, as the clinician, if you're dealing with pediatric patients, part of this is going to be the educational process of, hey, this is kind of going to be a lifelong thing that you're going to have to manage. You're going to be learning along the way. It's not going to be easy. We're going to be striving for periods of remission, although we're not going to be able to maybe get you fully better, so to speak.
Right.
We're shooting for, and we're trying to find the treatments and the changes that help you achieve the longest periods of remission, or the longest periods of, ultimately where you don't have a flare up.
So, okay. So there is no cure.
Right.
We're not going to fix this.
And maybe
for the
that's not the
person.
best thing you say to a 12-year-old, so I apologize. But again,
Yeah.
that's just part of the educational process, I think.
But this is the truth. If you don't want to lie to the kid, if there's no cure, what you're going to need to do is to learn how to manage this and reduce the flares.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a flare-based disease.
Okay. So how do you manage flares? How do you do that, especially at 12?
Even if we backpedal even slightly, one of the big components, or one of the causes they think of colitis and Crohn's and the inflammatory bowel diseases, is the autoimmune component. So you have infiltration of certain white blood cells, lymphocytes, plasma cells, macrophages, all these fancy names, all these things that typically have good function, in the system, that are ultimately on overdrive.
Okay.
And so then with treatment, which how you sort of drive treatment, or how they've come up with different treatment options, is you want to sort of combat that autoimmune component. So they'll often use steroids, they'll use, other anti-inflammatories, and, we can break some of those down further, but just even taking a, further step back, just looking at where this all kind of comes from. There's even a genetic component.
Oh, wow.
There's obviously environmental sort of implications, and, I thought this was very interesting. Smoking, for the most part, is almost always a negative in terms of any health outcome or any disease state. They actually found that nicotine was something that potentially helped individuals with ulcerative colitis specifically.
No kidding.
So if you're on Wikipedia, you might see that and you might get a little spooked. We're not recommending that you smoke or start using nicotine patches, but it is just a fun fact, if you will, if you're ever playing inflammatory bowel disease trivia, nicotine might have some benefit. So, but yeah, we're not recommending nicotine use.
Do not smoke.
Yeah,
do not smoke.
Not. And then Joey, I don't know if you had anything in that regard to add.
In terms of the treatments, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of difference between children and adults.
Okay.
And they're heavy hitters. It is steroids, it is medications that, especially during the flares, that do, even if you're going a little farther down the line, things that do alter the immune system, that are immunomodulators, DMARDs, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. So, you do go into some heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And I say this kind of sheepishly because I wish that there was maybe a version or a milder version of treatment for kids. So there's just, unfortunately, right now, really not. And that it involves the steroids. And then some people even stay on steroids, and to prevent remission, lower doses, something like budesonide that kind of stays in the gut and is used for, a little more, not as systemic as something like a prednisone. But definitely there's definitely a role of flora. This is not a probiotics cure. You see here, but flora plays a massive role, and even your body's response to the flora. From this article here that I pulled, I thought was very interesting. I lost exactly where it was, but yeah, Emory Children's Center in Atlanta, Georgia, Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology. Right in their beginning, their abstract, it says IBD, of which UC and Crohn's are the two, is thought to develop as a result of dysregulation of the immune system's response to normal gut flora. So in a genetically susceptible host. So even it's the body's response to your gut flora.
Right.
So if there's something, if you've got, what we term dysbiosis, history of antibiotic use or history of food poisoning, like we talked about before, you've got this kind of underlying SIBO growing dysbiosis in your gut. Your body's immune response to that potentially can have something to do with that as well.
Okay.
So I think probiotics are huge. Understanding your history of antibiotic use use is big. Anti-inflammatories like curcumin have shown to have some benefit. So there are things you can do in that regard, but in the traditional medicine realm, and if you're dealing with flares, you typically have got to stay in that world, so to say.
Yeah, and then even just to kind of help put some of that into a into a more global perspective. So Joey covered a lot of important parts there, but even if we back up, we look at this in maybe 5 categories, let's just say, as far as how this often gets treated. And I would be remiss not to at least kind of mention them more, stepwise. So obviously mention medications. Surgery, I think, is important to mention. Number 2.
Oh, wow.
I saw a statistic that upwards of 50% of patients with irritable bowel disease unfortunately end up having surgery of some kind, some sort of bowel resection, something along those lines. And that's just because of ultimately, as the disease process explains, there's that continual inflammatory ups and downs that are kind of damaging the mucosa.
Okay.
And so eventually you have some tissue that might need removed, and it's not easy. That's just one of the kind of the sad realities of this.
Yeah.
They have improved some of the surgical procedures that they're doing now. So before, the surgeries were, and they still can be, very invasive, almost always end up with the, a colostomy bag, or which, wherever the resection ends up, which many people manage to live that way, which we commend. I mean, that would be immensely difficult, but now they've almost worked the procedures in which there could be some sort of internal colostomy bag in a very elementary way to explain that. So the point of saying that is they're like anything, improving those techniques. So medication, surgery, Joey mentioned some supplementation, obviously probiotics, curcumin, which we can talk about is a good one. There's going to be dietary changes.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, as one might imply, just given the the nature of the condition, because your main goal is to reduce the severity of the flare-ups and also the frequency.
Yeah.
How do you do that? You're gonna have to make some lifestyle adjustments and
what are
recognize
those?
some things. Sure.
Quickly. I mean, you don't have to go deep into it, but what are the high points?
These will come as no surprise. You want to limit the intake of red meats, processed foods, things that can be kind of inherently inflammatory.
Flaming.
That's a little what's the word I'm looking for? A little controversial, the whole red meat thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, is red meat's inflammatory?
Yeah, it definitely can be. And again, you just got to keep some of this in context. It comes down to the amount that you're consuming for a lot of individuals.
I imagine some people that would be a try it and see kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Get in a stable position where you're not having a flare up.
Yeah.
Try some red meat and see if it
And if I had to hedge my bet there too, I would say that we're more focused on, as always, just trying to decrease the amount of processed meats.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. One of the recommendations that I read was potentially decreasing protein intake. High protein intakes, it can just be irritating to the GI tract potentially. That's another thing that potentially you have to play with. Alcoholic beverages, sulfur, sulfates, they've all been associated with with disease exacerbations.
What about fiber?
Definitely a good one.
Lots of that.
That's something that
keep things going.
Sensibly, fiber, for 101 reasons is useful. In this case, yes, it's important, but I think the devil's in the dose there too. Because if you're somebody that has had 8 stools per week that were blood containing and they were irritating and it was stressful and you're inflamed and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Increasing fiber intake, increasing the frequency at which you go can be a little bit of, it's going to be take some trial and error.
Yeah. So I think the key with fiber, acute stages, lower your fiber. You're not non-acute, you're in remission.
Right.
Up the fiber, keep your colon healthy.
Yeah.
Got it.
And that doesn't mean like you stop eating fruit.
Definitely.
And but if you're somebody who is supplementing with fiber, if you're somebody who ate, 342 grams of oatmeal a day, like that kind of stuff, like maybe consider, scaling that back.
And something to be aware of and manage yourself as you go on. Yeah.
Got it.
I think it's just another, it's a disease process where there's a million pieces of the pie and you're just trying to find which ones that can help, can help you best through a flare up, let's say. And then the other thing, not to cut you off, the other thing, since we're specifically maybe looking at more of a pediatric population, I saw the recommendation to try and monitor the DEXA scan or a DEXA scan reading, which looks at bone density.
Okay.
And so this is an interesting tie-in. You know, if you're 12 years old, you're still developing. Your bones or your bone density, the mineralization, all of that stuff is still in a very critical point, I would say.
Absolutely.
Because your ability to maybe absorb nutrients can be impaired from having something like this, or because maybe you're just unable to eat as much. You know, flares are more recurrent. It's just, you can see how this would cause issues with appetite,
100%,
weight loss, malnourishment. The key is in ensuring in the times where you're maybe feeling better to make sure you're eating a very nutrient-rich diet. These things will help ultimately with bone mineral density. You know, you might have to supplement with some calcium and some vitamin D if they find out that you're deficient. But to target that a little more, my bias, of course, is to ensure that you're resistance training. And so if you're somebody that has an early diagnosis of Crohn's, colitis, whatever the case, you might be a little more susceptible to these bone mineral density issues. Plus, which we'll highlight maybe a little more in the treatment section, you're probably going to be on corticosteroids for your flare-ups. Also can lower bone mineral density, even at low doses. At, you know, kind of infrequent uses, it can happen, especially then if you have 5 flare-ups a year. Those are all instances of being on steroids quite often to keep that at bay. Those are just all kind of pieces of the puzzle that can decrease your capacity to maintain strong bones, especially in a 12-year-old.
I was gonna say,
you know, if you're 50, 60, it's still equally important, but especially in a growing human being, you want to make sure that the diet, nourishing diet, resistance training, building, you know, axial loading of the skeleton, all of that sort of stuff is critically important.
Right, because resistance training directly increases bone density growth. Makes
it's
kind of the best, I would say, the best way to do it. So
that's counteracting what those steroids are going to do. Yeah. And anytime deal with anything that's got a autoimmune link, vitamin D is core. So I would want to make sure, again, this is not the vitamin D cures colitis. This is, you're trying to do what you can do to minimize issues. If you've got a low vitamin D level, and you know vitamin D is that immune modulator, that you've got to check your level, see where you are, and look at getting on some vitamin D. Another thing that has shown to have benefits in large scale across the board is low dose naltrexone. The dose, it's safe in kids. The dose can be dramatically, customized in a compounding pharmacy. Low dose naltrexone for irritable bowel disease and really any any autoimmune disease has been shown to have fantastic effect. So that is something I would 100% look into at its core, with autoimmune LDN, and as a broad anti-inflammatory, like we brought up before, turmeric.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm glad we can help somebody out like that. Anything else?
So just for my man here with the question, his mom, I guess, you know, just to maybe highlight some of the questions they've asked him or asked them. They're always going to kind of be screening and assessing his symptoms. And ultimately, again, those are the kind of things that are going to monitor disease progression. It's going to monitor if the treatment's working. So there's a questionnaire. It's the Pediatric Ulcerative Colitis Activity Index. And so that's a sequence of questions that they'll often use to just, again, if you've just been diagnosed, they'll ask these questions. If you've just started a new treatment, they're going to ask this kind of battery of questions. Not immensely useful as the layperson to kind of like know and memorize what those are. But again, it's a very active the point is it's a very active management process. There's going to be a lot of conversation with your, GI physician and such. And so just important to kind of know maybe why they're asking those questions. So the specific medication and the specific treatments that they'll use kind of comes back to this idea of disease location. So we mentioned a lot of medications that could have side effects. Let's just say somebody has a more distal form of colitis. So that just means that where they've determined through biopsy or through scoping or however, where they've seen the most amounts of inflammation to occur is more distally towards the rectum. That's towards the end of the tract, more distal. They will often use they'll use the same kind of medications. They're they're aminosalicylates.
Ooh.
And so they can use them orally and they can use them topically, and not in the sense that, you're going to rub it on your skin, but they might use it as a suppository.
Okay.
They might use it as an enema. And so
great.
just by default, you're going to be absorbing less. And so, some people might like to hear, oh, I'm not absorbing as much of this. I'm just using, it's a distal form of colitis. This is just maybe a more, easier way to classify this as mild disease progression. And then again, they're looking at stool frequency, stool quality, and the presence of systemic illness. So if you present with fever, God forbid, all the time, and there's all types of those, again, as the name implies, systemic effects, you might be more apt to be prescribed one of the oral versions of those medications.
Okay.
So, and then like Joey said, there's immunomodulators, a whole host of things, quite complicated to get into. And then I think I want to go back to the curcumin thing, which is huge.
Yeah.
It's most useful in maintaining remission. So theoretically, if you're in a flare-up, this is something they may not want you to start. It may not hurt, but this could be something to help buy you some time in between flare-ups. And so depending on which form you're using, you can use up to 4 grams a day for induction and up to 2 grams per day during like a maintenance phase of colitis. And so this is generally safe in kids as well.
Cool. I hope that helps, Lily, and whoever your kiddo is. That's a rough road to hoe, but you heard it here. You got to get yoked for the rest of your life.
That's right.
That's the best way to work on this. All right, moving right along. Several interesting articles, one right on top of the other, that all kind of had the same theme but different realms of attack. Joint pain and joint pain solutions having negative consequences. So both of them were talking about osteoarthritis, which is incredibly common. Mm-hmm. There are 2 treatments that are almost always suggested, and those are steroids and non-steroids. I was shocked by those 2 variations, but no, non-steroidal NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, right? Mm-hmm. And so the non-steroidal, those are like ibuprofen, right? Those are the common Aleve. Yes,
naproxen, ibuprofen, meloxicam, ketorolac is a prescription one, but the 2 over-the-counters, ibuprofen and naproxen.
Okay, those are the ones that I'm used to hearing about. And that makes sense. My joint hurts a little bit. I'm going to take an NSAID, ibuprofen, so that it doesn't hurt as bad. Mm-hmm. Okay. Steroids, what are we talking about here? What is the normal treatment process for joint pain? Let's say knees or shoulder or something like that.
Yeah, it's tough. I would say
you can do like a measurable dose pack, but I don't know that's how important that the specifics of it are really.
Okay,
it's just that you're bringing out big guns if you're using steroids.
Okay, so
there's somebody that has a disc. If like a disc issue came up, there's something going on low back specifically. Trying to get them out of a very acute stage of pain or osteoarthritic pain potentially.
Okay.
So little less. I would say it's a little less recommended at this point, but I would be remiss not to say we don't see it in the pharmacy.
Yeah, and some people need it. If you need daily use of a systemic steroid for osteoarthritis, I mean,
you're in a lot of pain.
Yeah, I feel terrible for you. Put it that way. Yeah, you're. So I would think that really who we're talking about here are the people who are just trying to get through their day, trying to get a run in, those kind of things, trying to get through their work day, those kind of things.
And then even just to, exactly. A lot of times what you'll see then is, since we were talking about steroids, you'll see corticosteroid injections.
Okay.
So that's triamcinolone injections. That's, oh man, I've been getting injections in my shoulders for 10 years, like that kind of stuff. That's often, triamcinolone paired with a local anesthetic, that kind of thing, which is very common,
And that's the idea being that the steroid helps to reduce inflammation so that there's less pain?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so this is the normal process we're talking about. These articles,
opioids. There's even now topical anti-inflammatories that are available over the counter now. So good and bad options.
Okay.
There. Yeah.
So that's what is normally prescribed or recommended. But these studies that we're seeing are suggesting that may not always be without consequence. One of these articles said a group from the University of California enlisted 277 people to participate in the study. This was a study on NSAIDs. The parties suffered from moderate to severe osteoarthritis in the knee. Participants had also been using NSAIDs for at least 1 year, so they'd been using them. In addition, information was examined from 793 people who also had the disease but didn't take any drugs. At the beginning of the study, the group conducted MRI scans of the participants' knees and followed up with more scans after 2 years had passed. The inflammation of the joints, which is the problem in the first place, is the inflammation, as well as the quality of the cartilage, was, quote, worse at baseline in the participants taking NSAIDs compared to the control group and worsened at 4-year follow-up, unquote. Now, I'm no doctor, but if you're taking an anti-inflammatory every day, it could be because you have a worse case, right? Why would that not be the assumption?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the really relevant part is that 4 years later, their situation was even worse than the control group.
Yeah, because we have to remember too, what's happening is, the anti-inflammatories help, but what's happening in osteoarthritis is the breakdown of cartilage. So that
disease
process is not stopped by anti-inflammation.
Got it.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can always think of and there's more nuance to it, but in general, you can think of osteoarthritis as wear and tear.
Right.
It's wear and tear. Now, there's a little bit of a paradox that if you don't use it at all, like if you say, well, I have mild arthritis in my, and Dante, I'm sure is going to get to this, but if you have mild osteoarthritis in your knee and you say, well, I'm not doing anything anymore, I'm not biking, now you want to take some of the pressure off that joint.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to bike versus run.
Right.
Maybe you want to power walk, you want to row or power walk, those kind of things versus, things that are pounding like running, but you want to keep using it so that the body, I don't know what the exact mechanism is, but you want to make sure that the body is still trying to protect the synovial fluid and trying to keep that area, usable functionally as it is essentially being worn down. So I don't know what Dante's thoughts are about the study itself, but to me, it wasn't that surprising because I may not even really totally linking it to the use of the NSAID. I'm just thinking, it's been a while and their cartilage is getting more and more worn down.
Right.
Whenever I think of the problems with oral NSAIDs, I'm thinking more systemic problems. I'd like to see what happened to these, people potentially their kidneys.
Yeah.
Cardiovascular events. That's what I'm more concerned about whenever somebody comes in and says, that they're taking Aleve ibuprofen every day.
Yeah.
So,
man.
So there's a couple different ways to go here because then you've got the, injectable corticosteroids.
Yeah, that's the other article was saying that that injectable corticosteroids was effectively having the same issue, that they were doing follow-up studies and people who had been having the injections were having worse outcomes years down the road than those who didn't.
I think that's a little different.
Okay. Fill me in.
Yeah, doing those shots, those steroid shots right to the site has shown to break down the cartilage in the area. It gives you a tremendous amount of relief.
Yeah.
But doing those shots directly to that area has shown you can get relief. 7 days? Takes up to like 7 days to work. You can get relief for months, for a couple months. But especially if you get them repeatedly, that you can definitely. That's been out there. About that. That's corticosteroids, hyaluronic acid. There's still some controversy over how much safer that is, but that is kind of like the synovial fluid. That is like a precursor to cartilage. That does take longer to work, up to 4 weeks to work. It is often not covered. It's pretty expensive, but it does usually last a little longer, maybe like 3 to 6 months. So two different two different things here going on with osteoarthritis. What are you doing orally?
Right.
There's overlap with steroids. And what are you doing to the site?
Well, okay, then help me out here. So if there are downsides to everything, but I still want to be able to walk or play tennis or, whatever the case, play piano, do the things that I need to do, I don't feel like getting injections into my knuckles. That sounds like a bad idea. What should I be doing to maintain movement as long as possible to the greatest degree possible?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what I'm about to say is kind of like one of those, it's easy for me to say, kind of things.
Sure.
But ultimately, I think it still starts with the belief system. And so, like Joey mentioned, we've been hearing this narrative, whether true or not, or partial or nuanced or whatever, is the whole wear and tear idea. So, like, I don't know what you necessarily call it, because when you look at X-rays, that's what's ultimately kind of shown.
Yeah.
The issue with that is there's a high percentage of people who have the same looking X-ray as somebody. So they have two people. They both have, let's say, wear and tear. There's degradation of the cartilage in the knee. One group has symptoms, the other has no symptoms. So you're always left at sort of this pivotal point.
Right.
Like, is this all true? Or is this just like anything, a massively complex, disease, disorder that is, there's societal, psychological beliefs.
Sure.
There's obviously a physical component. So it comes back to the very inception of that causal belief, wear and tear. Oh no, it's bone on bone. That does not sound good.
Right.
The last person I heard with bone on bone ended up having a knee replacement. Oh no, I have vulnerable joints. Oh no, I'm going to avoid activities. Surgery is my only option. And that's just again, it's easy for me to say, but that's like the quick and dirty of sort of what happens here. It's like, I'm just sitting here deteriorating. And if I exercise, I'm going to cause it to deteriorate faster. And if I don't exercise, I'm going to deteriorate as well. So trying to move people away from that narrative is huge. And that's number one. It's
so you're saying mindset is enormous in this.
It is mindset. There's no way to out mindset I woke up and my knees are bothering me. It hurts to get out of bed.
Why would I want to go ride my bike? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why it has to be, even that's why I said it, but I knew Dante would take the reins with it. But like, that's exactly what you have to do. That's one of the key things to getting your knee at least feeling better is to, now again, no running, but walking, but biking, swimming, that's a critical thing. But it's a paradox, because in your mind, why do you want to use the thing that hurts?
Right. Yeah.
My knee hurts. I've been told it's wearing down. I saw this X-ray. Let me go move it around.
Yeah.
And work with it. I see why.
Yeah.
There is a mindset issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, and nobody's really to blame. Again, you look at some of these changes that are on X-rays, or you've talked to an orthopedic surgeon or whatever. It makes complete sense. I mean, the proof is sort of in the pudding with what you're seeing. But again, we know that with how complicated symptoms can be, and who's having symptoms, who's not, different management and such, that it's another one of those things that's you have to take such a holistic, such a holistic approach. And so what you're ultimately doing is trying to as the individual, find the right entry point to moving around. I mean, it could literally start from sitting to standing.
Yeah.
And that's a test that they'll use clinically to kind of see where, maybe assess somebody's fall risk or see what kind of progression they're making in occupational therapy, whatever. You're just trying to find that entry point. And then as you go, you try to find the upper limit, not pushing things into it hurts so bad I can't move, or I'm not going to be able to move the next day. But if it's somewhat tolerable and you're not totally debilitated the next day, that's a positive. And you start to combine those small wins day after day, week after week, and you're pushing the ball down the line as far as when you thought maybe you were going to have to get surgery, when you're going to have to get the joint replaced, all that kind of stuff. So it's finding the most tolerable level of symptoms and doing your best to not catastrophize or be fearful of those symptoms.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, I mean, in a very terse way, you have to kind of believe like, I'm not really making this worse. And we know that. We almost know that for sure. Unless you're driving things into painful, compromised positions, generally speaking, you're hard pressed to think that you're making it worse.
So long as you're not experiencing serious acute pain, you're probably helping. The discomfort is okay. It's pain that's bad. Okay.
Yeah, along those lines, especially when you're talking about knees too, because that's still a major one. It's the age-old, weight.
Yeah.
Losing some weight is going to be critical. And if you can incorporate that with the physical activity, obviously, losing some weight in and of itself is going to help as well. Just straight physics.
I know a lot of physical therapists I've heard repeat the phrase often, motion is lotion. That's what you're talking about. Just keep moving. It'll keep things going.
Yeah.
And then it's just, this is going to seem like totally out of the blue, but life stressors, poor sleep, anxiety, all those other things. Like, people think that that's just like my pain, my chronic knee pain, my chronic back pain, the chronic arthritis in my hip. This is one box.
Right.
This set of issues, the anxiety, this whatever this classification, and my high blood pressure, all this kind of stuff, this is another box. And then this down here is in another box.
Right.
And what I do to have fun, this is in another box. Well, guess what? It's all fluid, and all of those things, your beliefs, all of this kind of stuff is playing into what maybe this disease process kind of looks like for you. And so even for myself with training, it's like I've had a couple knee injuries. It's like I'm on this. I felt it when I was 22. I guess I'm on the fast track to a knee replacement. It literally crossed my mind.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of this, not that you push yourself inexplicably, you just want to start to question some of the feelings that you might have towards something like arthritis.
Right. Because the instinct always is, as soon as you feel a twinge of pain, stop doing the thing, whatever that is, right? When you touch the stove and it's hot, you pull your hand away. Don't touch the stove again. If, gripping the golf club makes your knuckles hurt, then don't touch the golf club again. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. In fact, in a lot of these situations, it's the opposite.
And it's not just a feeling. These things are so ingrained.
Yeah.
You heard it from a coach when you were 10. Then you saw your mom get less active into her 40s.
Yep.
And then you saw grandpa in his 70s not throwing the ball with you anymore. it's literally everywhere. And it's you don't even have to be consciously aware of it. It's all there.
And if weight gain is an issue, a complicating issue on top of this, then it makes sense that the less you move, you start gaining weight. It keeps getting worse. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I've got this bad knee.
Yeah. Man. So the bottom line here is there's issues with all of these major treatments. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
But the best thing you can do is keep moving. And anything else? Any other lifestyle changes or supplementation? Anything else?
Supplement-wise, quickly, back turmeric again. We're going to hit that again.
Yep.
Great anti-inflammatory, and fish oil.
Okay.
So keep it simple with those two.
Okay.
Yeah, at least 500 milligrams twice a day on the turmeric.
Yeah.
At least, maybe even do 2 of those capsules twice a day to start, and then at least about 800 or so once a day on the fish oil. 800 to 1,000 twice a day.
Cool.
And then even though we kind of touched on some of the negatives of the different treatments, we know that using ibuprofen, Tylenol, all that kind of stuff they provide sort of transient benefits at best for some people. That's okay. If specifically, let's just say you're like, I want to try something less invasive, less side effects, less whatever. I'm going to go for the topical steroid instead of the oral steroid. Let's just see how this works. If that means if you're going to walk for 20 minutes more than you have, or go to the gym for 30 more minutes, or start doing something, and that helps you do what you need to do to start the process, they're there as tools.
I was just going to say that makes a lot of sense.
The topical NSAIDs are a great option, I think. It's just a really nice way to get that NSAID to the site. Because remember, we're still not certain from the article that it's the anti-inflammatory that's degrading that joint.
Right.
So if you get some NSAID to the site via a diclofenac or a Voltaren to the site. We even do some specialized pain ones in our compounding lab, but you can get a Voltaren over the counter. I think that's a great option. And then, if it's once in a while, maybe you overdid it, or maybe it's just a real bad day, or whatever the case may be. It was Thanksgiving and you were carrying your grandkid around all day, like whatever. Yeah, take an ibuprofen that day. It's not like, those things aren't the end of the world, but have the turmeric and stuff on board if you don't want to touch it at all, or have the turmeric and omegas on board ongoing, then maybe you can take that ibuprofen or Tylenol a little less.
These articles are not to say that you shouldn't do these things. If your doctor's talking to you, it's not an option. It's just to say there are downsides. Do the things you can do without getting into that to the greatest extent possible. But the point is to live longer, better, right? So moving and doing all makes sense.
Yeah. If there's maybe one more like word of wisdom, I would say that get rid of the idea of I moved the wrong way and it did this. I did this differently and it caused this. It had to be with my form that it caused this. So that narrative is sort of, I think, kind of the last line of all this.
Yeah.
If you finally do take the step and you're exercising a little more, or you started a new program.
You're talking to me, aren't you?
Maybe.
I might have hurt my back the other day.
It's another thing that it's a function of multiple factors, not just the this, or my right foot was this, I have this asymmetry and my left foot was here, my right foot was here. Maybe there's a small little tiny component there.
Okay.
But but I just encourage you to not let that drive any sort of decision. It's much deeper than that.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Tyler.
Things got very personal there. Okay, let's get out of this one. All of our products, anything we talked about, is available on our website, askjoedimatteo.com. That's askjoedimatteo.com. That is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, follow what's going on. You can find past episodes of this show or classic episodes of the original show that used to air, Ask the Pharmacist with Joe DiMatteo. If you have any questions, we want to hear them. Please, questions at askjoedimatteo.com. And then you can get personalized counseling going through all of the options. It's fantastic. Show notes, articles we referenced are always available on our site. And if you are only listening, you're missing half the fun. Every episode is available as a video too. Just go to YouTube or Rumble and look for Generation Health. Big thanks to Josiah Schweinberg, who is back there making us look good. Michael Deppish, our editor. Joyce Gibb, nurse practitioner, who handles our private consults. Diane Silverman, who manages our products. Terry, who handles scheduling. Cecilia, who does distribution. Joey DiMatteo. Dante DiMatteo. It's good to see you guys. I am Tyler Andrews, and that is it for us this week. But now it is your turn. What are you going to do with what you've heard? Are you just going to listen? Be a fun fan? We would rather that you take some action and become part of this Generation Health.